Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
And this being the election campaign, we hear from a range of parties. In a moment, I'm going to be talking to the co-leader of the Greens, Caroline Lucas. But joining me now from Cardiff, Plaid Cymru's Leanne Wood. Leanne Wood, this all takes place in the aftermath of Manchester, of course. And Wales has not been immune from either jihadis or from victims of jihadi attacks. So can I ask you what Plaid Cymru's message to people who are thinking about how to vote and wondering about the security issue in particular? What is Plaid Cymru's message to them this morning?
Well, it makes no sense to us in Plaid Cymru for those public services that rose to the challenge and supported so many people in Manchester, the health service, the emergency services, the police, obviously, for those to be cut. And Manchester's police service has been cut, and there are plans for more cuts. And it's absolutely awful what happened. It's difficult to see how you can absolutely prevent it in the future, but you can give people some more confidence by making sure there are plans in place and that emergency services are properly resourced to deal with things. We wouldn't need troops on the streets, perhaps, if there were enough police officers on the streets.
Well, that's a very good answer about the aftermath of the attack, but what about actually catching people first? Plaid Cymru MPs have voted again and again against surveillance suggestions in the House of Commons, against legislation on tighter surveillance. Aren't you basically on the wrong side of this argument?
We're against mass surveillance. We're in favour of more targeted surveillance. It makes sense that if people are under suspicion, that the police need to keep a close eye on them, and so we support resources for that. The idea of watching everyone and being able to access everyone's email and communications, that's where we have a problem, and that's where our MPs have voted consistently then against the Snoopers Charter, for example. And
this is absolutely the heart of the argument, because nobody really thinks, do they, the police are going to look at all of our emails, survey everybody. They've got 23,000 suspected jihadis in this country, and they can't deal with them. So this fantasy that there's going to be mass surveillance of everybody, everybody is under threat, everybody's going to be watched by the big state if we allow these laws, it's ridiculous.
But if you're looking to keep people under surveillance, that's a very resource-intensive activity.
Exactly.
And the police need to be adequately resourced to do that. It's better that they watch those people who are at most risk and keep a close eye on those, rather than the entire population. There is such a thing as information overload,
yes,
and it's better to concentrate resources.
But they were never asking for being able to look at the entire population. They know who they need to look at, and they need the resources for that. Can I ask you very straightforwardly, after Manchester, a lot of people are thinking we need to think again about this whole issue of security. Are you in Plaid Cymru thinking again about it?
Well, you have to review security all the time. I mean, it's, you know, it's terrible that this has happened, but it's not, it's the most serious incident that's happened since 2005. So something is clearly working in some ways, but then, on the other hand, the person responsible for this was brought to the attention of authorities. There are serious questions that need to be answered as to why action wasn't taken earlier to prevent this. So we need to learn lessons from this. That's a cliche to say maybe, but you have to review at all times.
The army and some of the armed police are coming off the streets and the beaches and so forth quite soon. You've got a huge event in Cardiff, the Champions League, coming up next weekend. Do you want to see more armed police back for that? Are you concerned about that event in particular?
I want to see it adequately resourced security-wise, obviously. It's going to be a big event. Many people are going to come to Wales. I don't think people should be put off from coming. It's going to be an amazing event. And I'm sure by making sure that the security side is properly resourced, that people will have that confidence and assurance.
Leanne Wood from a sun-kissed Cardiff, thanks for talking to us very much indeed. And so to Caroline Lucas. Again, the same sort of question. Are you thinking again in the Green Party about security issues after Manchester?
Well, I think we're always considering and reconsidering in the light of evidence as it comes forward. And certainly one of the concerns, I think, well, one of the concerns I was going to say was that apparently people were reporting concerns about Salman Abedi well before the Manchester atrocity. And so certainly one of the questions is, why weren't resources put into following that up at the time? So certainly there are questions that need to be answered. But I think certainly also it's clear that the blame for what happened in Manchester is solely with the perpetrator himself. It was an absolutely appalling atrocity. Absolutely. It happens in a context, and it's right for us to reconsider all aspects of that context, right through from levels of policing through to the kind of debate that the Labour Party and Jeremy started this week. And presumably the internet as well. I mean, you say in your manifesto that we think the internet should be free of state and corporate surveillance with our rights and freedoms protected. In these circumstances, and knowing that jihadi groups and extremist groups use encrypted messaging on the internet and also use the internet to promote their hate-filled messages, do you really think that's a sensible policy? Well, our policy is about opposing the mass industrial scale surveillance of emails. And let me explain what I mean by that, because there are plenty of people who you would see as being on the side of the argument that are absolutely wanting to make sure that we crack down on this as hard as possible, who would say that the bigger you make the haystack in which you're looking for the needle, the harder it is to find it. So having all of that extra surveillance doesn't work. It's targeted surveillance that really makes the difference. And that's what we're certainly in favour of. So it's very hard to understand. Are you saying that you don't want the police to have extra powers of surveillance, or you do want the police to have extra powers? We opposed the Snoopers Charter on the grounds that there was evidence that suggested that it wasn't going to be effective. So it wasn't on a kind of only a civil liberties line, although that's important. It was also about how effective is it if you're increasing the number of people you're putting under surveillance, if you're mass trawling. Because do you know what? You know, people like myself are on the domestic extremist list. People like peaceful environmentalists are on that list. How does that help if the police resources are being spent looking after people like myself or my colleague Jenny Jones, rather than people that really pose a serious risk? And that's what we're saying. Do you think that ending end-to-end encryption is wrong? Do I think that ending end-to-end encryption is wrong? No. So you would like to see this end-to-end encryption, very, very controversial. I'll be talking to the Home Secretary about it later on. You'd like to see that ended? I want to take advice from the security services about what they think needs to keep us safe. That is the bottom line for the Green Party. One thing we do know is that Abedi's friends and family contacted the state, did exactly what they were supposed to do through the PREVENT mechanism. But you have called PREVENT this attempt to involve the community more, which in some respects has worked, xenophobic. Why was it xenophobic? Because many in the Muslim community believe it's been an attack on their group in particular. We absolutely want there to be a mechanism whereby people can come to the state with concerns. But when it is perceived by the Muslim community itself as being a toxic Big Brother brand, then we need to look at it again. And that is what the Mayor of Manchester is saying. That is what many people, the Foreign Affairs Committee and others, have said. We need to review PREVENT to make sure that it is seen as something that is broad and inclusive and absolutely bottom-up, not top-down through Big Brother. Let me put it to you that this is knee-jerk liberalism, and one of the very few Muslim MPs in the last Parliament, Khalid Mahmood, said this. He said, by and large, the majority of the Muslim community have no real issue with PREVENT. What we see is small groups of so-called activists who continue to condemn PREVENT but provide no alternative. Well, listen, and he's talking really about people like you. Listen, my position on PREVENT is guided by the Muslim community that I speak to in my own constituency and who I speak to elsewhere. It's about what is the most effective way of keeping people safe. And when you have a programme that has lost credibility in vast areas of the Muslim society, then I think it means we should look at it again. It doesn't mean scrapping it and not replacing it, but it does certainly mean making sure we have a mechanism that has the confidence of the communities so that we can make sure that we do our very best to keep people safe. Right, Caroline Lucas, in other circumstances, we'd be talking about many other things, wind farms and solar energy and all the rest of it. On this, and jobs and jobs climate change. All the rest of it. But today, this morning, you'll understand that's all we've got time for. But thank you very much indeed. I've been getting away with it all.